Welcome to the Drama Diaries. Here we bring you real-life stories filled with emotions, struggles, and the unexpected twists of life. Imagine you've given your all for your marriage, yet you're blamed, underestimated, and even humiliated. This is the reality for Della. Her husband, Kona, refuses to work, and her mother-in-law, Jabrig, constantly points fingers at her, making her life even harder. What would you do if you were in Della's shoes? Would you stay and fight or walk away? Find out the full story only on the Drama Diaries. The evening sky began to turn orange when Della stepped out of the small mini-market in the corner of town. His hand tightly gripped a plastic bag containing makeshift food ingredients. His face looked tired, but he still maintained his smile. In his heart, he said to himself, "I will definitely get through everything." Della is a passionate 26-year-old woman. She married Kona, a man who was initially full of hopes and big dreams. In the past, Kona was a hard worker, but things changed drastically after his company went bankrupt. Now, Kona has been unemployed for almost a year, and the family burden is increasingly heavy on Della's shoulders. Arriving at their small rented house on the outskirts of town, Della saw Kona sitting on the terrace, playing with her cell phone. "Sir, have you looked for work today?" Della asked in a soft voice, even though in her heart there was a slight feeling of disappointment. Kona sighed and replied lazily, "Yes, but there's nothing suitable yet. I'm still looking for it." Della just nodded. He knew Kona was having a hard time, but he was also tired of being the only one fighting. That evening, while Della was tidying up the kitchen after their simple dinner, a telephone call came in. It was from Della's father-in-law, Jabrig. "Della, are you home?" Jabrig's voice sounded firm on the other end. "Yes, ma'am. What is it?" "Come home tomorrow. I have something important to discuss." Without waiting for an answer, the phone was disconnected. Della was silent. She felt bad. Jabrig never really liked him from the start. What else will happen?
The next morning, Della and Kona were ready to go to Kona's parents' house in the village. Throughout the journey, Della's heart was filled with discomfort. Jabrig, Della's mother-in-law, always had a way of making her feel small. Upon arriving at her in-law's house, Della caught her breath. The house was big and magnificent, very different from their small rented house. As soon as she entered, Jabrig's face was immediately visible in the living room, sitting with his arms crossed. "Finally you're here," said Jabrig in a curt tone. Della bowed politely. "Yes, ma'am. What's wrong?" Jabrig took a deep breath, then looked at Della sharply. "I want to ask, how long are you going to let Kona be like this?" Della was surprised. "What do you mean? Your husband is unemployed. He used to be a man with a future, but since marrying you, his life has been ruined. Are you a wife or a burden, huh?" Della choked. She turned to Kona, hoping her husband would defend her. But what she saw was a painful sight. Kona just lowered his head silently, as if confirming his mother's words. "I never want to see my son become a useless man. If you are a good wife, you should be able to make him stand up again." Jabrig's voice grew louder. Della held back her tears that were starting to well up. She wanted to defend herself, wanted to say that all this time she had fought tooth and nail for their family. But what was the use? In Jabrig's eyes, she was still the one who was most at fault. With a trembling voice, Della could only say, "I always support Kona, Mom. But maybe I'm not good enough in your eyes." Jabrig snorted sarcastically. "Know that you're lacking." Della felt her chest tighten. She glanced at Kona once more, hoping her husband would say something. However, all she got was silence.
After hearing Jabrig's harsh words, Della could only bite her lip, holding back her anger and tears that were about to spill. The atmosphere in the living room was so tense, only the sound of the wall clock could be heard clearly. Kona was still silent, as if this problem was not about him. "Mom, I've tried." I work hard for my family, and I never stop supporting Kona. Della's voice trembled, but she still tried to speak calmly. But I'm also human, Mom. I'm tired. I need a husband who is also willing to fight, not just me. Jabrig's eyes bulged. So now you want to blame my son? He used to be fine before he met you. Della was shocked. Once again, all the blame was placed on her. Mom, Kona lost his job not because of me. It was a disaster. I never left him. I stayed. I just wanted him to have the effort to get back up. Jabrig laughed sarcastically. If you're tired, why don't you just get a divorce instead of you continuing to blame your own husband? Della was silent. Those words were like a hard slap to her. She had never thought that far ahead, but why was it Jabrig who suggested it? Della turned to Kona, hoping that at least this time her husband would defend their marriage. However, all she saw was a blank expression. If you really want to separate, I can't do anything, Del. Kona said softly, without emotion. Della was stunned. Kona's words still echoed in her head. If you really want to separate, I can't do anything, Del. It felt like being stabbed in the back. All this time she had tried her best to maintain their household, but her husband instead spoke as if their marriage was meaningless. So this is all my fault, Maz? Della's voice trembled. Kona wiped his face, looking frustrated. I didn't say that, Del, but look at the reality. I'm unemployed. We barely make ends meet, and Mom keeps blaming you. Maybe. It's better if we're not together. Jabrig smiled in satisfaction. Well, you finally realize it, Kona. A girl like Della just brings bad luck. Della held her breath. Her eyes started to burn, but she didn't want to cry in front of them. She strengthened her heart and stood up. If Maz Kona really agrees with Mom, fine. I won't force you. But remember, I'm your wife, Maz, not your enemy. Without waiting for an answer, Della turned and walked out of the house. Her hands were shaking, her chest tight. She didn't know where to go, but one thing was for sure. She wouldn't let herself be trampled on again. As Della walked towards the gate, a soft voice stopped her. Della? Della turned around. Kona was standing in the doorway, his face full of doubt. There was something in his gaze, as if he wanted to say something, but was holding back. But before Kona could speak, Jabrig had already interrupted. Just let him be. Let him come to his senses. Della took a deep breath. Without saying anything else, she walked away. Under the darkening twilight sky, Della promised herself, if her husband chose to give up, then she would choose to survive. Alone.
Della walked aimlessly, letting her footsteps take her wherever they wanted. Her heart was broken, but at the same time, something began to grow inside her, a determination. She took out her cell phone and looked at the contacts she hadn't contacted in a long time. After hesitating for a moment, she finally typed a message. Mbatrina, do you still need employees at your cafe? Mbatrina was her old friend who owned a small cafe in the city. Before she got married, Della often helped out there. It didn't take long for a reply to come in. Yes, Del, I really need someone. Can you start tomorrow? Della smiled thinly, even though her tears were still welling up. I'll come tomorrow, Mbak. Thank you. That night, Della returned to the rented house. Kona hadn't come home yet. Whether he was still at his mother's house, or was deliberately avoiding her, Della didn't care anymore. For the first time in a long time, she wanted to think about herself. If he doesn't want to fight, I will fight. I won't give up just because they think I'm weak. The next morning, Della woke up early and got ready for her first day of work at Mbatrina's cafe. She wore simple clothes, tied her hair, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Starting today, I'm not the same Della anymore. As she was about to leave, the door to the rented house opened. Kona entered with a tired face, but when he saw Della all dressed up and ready to go, His brows furrowed. "Where are you going?" he asked. Della looked at him with a flat stare. "Work." Kona looked surprised. "Work? Since when?" "Since I realized that I can't keep depending on people who don't even care about their own future," Della answered without hesitation. Kona was silent, unable to say anything. Della took her bag, passed her husband, and left without looking back at him. Della pedaled her small motorbike towards Mbakrina's cafe. Her heart was still heavy, but there was a new spirit slowly growing within her. This wasn't about proving something to Habrig or Kona. It was about herself. When she arrived at the cafe, Mbakrina greeted her warmly. "Finally, you're back to work, Del. I'm sure you can help this cafe grow." Della smiled. "I hope so too, Mba." The first day of work went smoothly. Della was busy serving customers, serving coffee, and memorizing the new menu. She felt productive, something she hadn't felt since getting married. However, her afternoon break was interrupted when her phone vibrated. Kona's name appeared on the screen. Della took a deep breath before picking it up. "What's wrong, Maz?" she asked flatly. "What time are you coming home?" Kona's voice sounded strange, like he didn't like it. "Evening. I work until closing time." "What kind of work? Up until that late?" Kona started to sound annoyed. Della bit her lip. "I work at Mbakrina's cafe. I need money, sir. I can't continue living in uncertainty." There was a pause on the other end before Kona said coldly, "So now that you're having a good job, you've forgotten about your husband?" Della laughed softly, but it was full of sadness. "You just realized that I worked for one day, but you didn't realize that I've been working hard alone for this household for a year?" Kona fell silent. Della continued, her voice starting to tremble. "I've never forgotten that I have a husband, sir. It's actually me who's been feeling forgotten." Without waiting for an answer, Della hung up. She took a deep breath, then went back to work. For the first time, she chose not to care about other people's feelings. This time, she chose herself. That night, after finishing her work at the cafe, Della came home with mixed feelings. Her body was exhausted, but her heart felt lighter than before. She began to feel that her life was back on track. However, when she arrived at the rented house, she was surprised to see Kona sitting on the porch, waiting for her. Her husband's face looked gloomy. His eyes were dull. "Why did you just come home?" Kona asked in a tone that was difficult to interpret. Della closed the gate without turning around. "I'm working, Maz. I told you earlier." Kona got up from her seat and followed Della into the house. "We have to talk." Della put down her bag and looked at her husband flatly. "Talk about what? About me who is working now? Or about Maz who let Mom talk as she pleased earlier?" Kona rubbed her face in frustration. "I don't know what to do, Del. I'm stressed too. I know Mom is too strict, but I'm also having a hard time. I can't defend you when I'm still a failure myself." Della chuckled, but her laughter was full of sadness. "So because you're having a hard time, I have to be the one to take it all on myself? I have to accept all of Mrs. Jabrig's accusations alone?" Kona fell silent. Della took a deep breath. "I'm tired, Maz. I'm tired of always being the one in the wrong. I'm tired of begging for my own husband's defense." Her eyes began to fill with tears, but this time it wasn't because she was weak, but because she finally realized something. She didn't need pity. She just needed to be appreciated. "If you don't want to try for us, I don't want to keep enduring it all by myself." Della walked to her room, leaving Kona still rooted to the spot. That night, she slept with a calmer heart, even though she knew a bigger storm might be coming. However, one thing was for sure. She would no longer beg for love from someone who didn't even want to fight for it. That morning, Della woke up with a different feeling. Usually, she would wake up first to prepare breakfast and make sure everything was ready before Kona woke up. But this time, she didn't feel the need to do all that. She came out of the room and saw Kona still sitting in the living room, looking like she hadn't slept all night. "Aren't you working today?" Kona asked softly. Della took a glass of water, then answered without turning around. "I came in at noon, so I still have time to rest." Kona took a deep breath. "Del, can we talk nicely?" Della finally looked at her husband. "Sure, but the question is, what do you want to talk about? About our marriage? About me being blamed all the time? Or about you keeping quiet when your mother said I was a burden?" Kona lowered her head. "I know I was wrong. I should have defended you. I shouldn't have kept quiet." Della smiled slightly, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Should I have? But in reality, you prefer to keep quiet. Why? Because you're afraid of Mom? Or because you agree that I'm a burden?" Kona lifted his face, looking shocked. "No, Del. I never thought of you as a burden." Della chuckled. "Then why don't you ever try for us? Why do you keep giving up? I'm not mad because you lost your job, Maz. I'm mad because you prefer to stay silent and do nothing." Kona fell silent again. Della took a deep breath. "Maz, I've tried hard enough for this household. But if I'm the only one struggling alone, I can get tired too. I have my limits too." Kona held her hand. "I don't want to lose you, Del." Della stared at Kona's hand that was holding hers, but she didn't feel the warmth that used to be there. "If you don't want to lose me, prove it. I don't want to just listen to promises without trying." She then pulled her hand away, took her bag, and went to work. Kona remained sitting there, watching his wife leave with a confused feeling. For the first time, he truly felt afraid. Afraid of losing Della forever. Della finally managed to get a promotion at her workplace because of her hard work. However, at the same time, she received news that Kona was involved in trouble because of Ryan's illegal business. Kona finally realized that she had made a big mistake. She wanted to leave, but Ryan threatened her. Della, who heard about this problem, came and confronted Kona directly. "I've been patient enough, Maz. If you can't get away from this life, I'm leaving." At this point, Kona really had to choose. Would he prove himself as a responsible husband, or lose Della forever? After a long inner struggle, Kona finally reported Ryan's business to the authorities and managed to get out of the circle. He came to Della and said, "I know I was wrong. I realized it too late, but I really want to change. If you still want to give me a chance, I will try my whole life to make up for everything." Della stared at him for a long time, then said, "The opportunity is not just through words, Maz. Show it with actions." In the next few months, Kona really changed. He got a decent job and started to take responsibility. Jobrig, who finally realized that Della was not his weak daughter-in-law, began to relax his attitude. At the end of the story, Della finally accepted Kona back, not out of pity, but because Kona was finally worth fighting for. End.